make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects, and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, ex-Muslim host Aina, keeping it non-controversial. Welcome to panel 10. We're going to be discussing alt-right women and their total shock at discovering that their men in the alt-right are total sexist douchebags. I've got YouTuber and badass PhD Kristi Winters and snarky tweeter SJW bitch and physics grad student Olive, or as you may know her, at Coherent States, with me here today. So it should be fun. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure.
I'm so happy to be here and talking to you both for the first time.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Different from like Twitter to have like real conversations with people that you talk to, right?
I know, finally.
Yeah. So
more than 280 characters.
I know.
It's good for me. I'm so wordy. It's ridiculous.
Did you say horny?
I said wordy.
Oh, wordy.
But whatever floats your boat.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, this is not that kind of conversation. But, if it makes you horny, that's fine.
Oh, God. Ugh.
That's your kink. That's all right. No one's judging you.
Probably the least likely topic to do that.
So, yeah, I was looking for who I could talk to about this because I just found it so hilarious how, like, Lauren Southern was making videos explaining herself, saying, I'm not married because I'm only 22. So what if I, spout these, like, ultra-conservative and trad life talking points all the time and make fun of women for being single and feminist and wanting careers But now it's about me. Well, look, I'm only 22. I can't get married all of a sudden. Like, yeah.
I know.
And then Tara McCarthy was like tweeting stuff. On December 3rd, she tweeted that men in the alt-right are going to have to decide whether they will continue to passively or actively endorse this behavior or speak out against it. If you want more women speaking publicly about ethno-nationalism, I guess you choose the latter. I didn't see many alt-right men speaking out against alt-right women being harassed on Twitter. I mean, the only person I saw kind of talk about it was the golden one.
So
Right.
There were a few people, from what I recall, the people that I've seen speak out against it were, oddly enough, Black Pigeon Speaks, a.k.a. Women Destroy Nations/Civilizations and Other Uncomfortable Truths guy, as well as Millennial Woes, who, generally speaking, has some of the most horribly reactionary views about women in society. And of course, the golden one, who made a video called The Woman Question, where he talked about... I know, it's just so ridiculous, how he talks about...
Well, it's like the Jews are on one side, and then there are the women, so you need different questions,
Exactly. You need a question for every group that you don't like. So,
Right. But then I saw Andrew Anglin of Daily Stormer post this, style guide of how to write for his website, right? So
right, I saw that.
he posted how even when you blame women, you have to ultimately blame the Jews. So
Exactly.
people get upset when there's too many enemies. They get disheartened. So you can't blame multiple things. Everything always has to end back with the Jews. So when you blame women, make sure you blame Jew feminism.
Exactly, because their thinking is so reductive and simple and stupid that they have to always have one ultimate scapegoat, because even then, a multitude of scapegoats is just too much for them to possibly conceive.
Yeah. And come on, these guys are, lacking nuance. This scene doesn't treat women well. I mean, how shocking is that?
My first reaction was actually, initially, like, the first reaction I had to their complaints was one of empathy. I was like,
Yeah.
it really
Exactly. I
sucks being
felt
a
the
woman
same way.
online.
It does suck. It
Absolutely.
really sucks.
I have to
I
say,
relate to
though,
that.
my first reaction was LOL. I wasn't as empathetic, but
that
then
was my next reaction.
yeah,
I think that was pretty natural.
like sure, eventually I felt like, yeah, of course, we all have been saying this and feeling this for a long time. It really does suck to be a woman online, and you do get unfairly, disproportionately attacked. But you kind of signed up for it. You participated in it by saying that women aren't good for careers, they're good for making babies and things like that. And then now you're not making babies. Of course you're going to get attacked.
And it's so funny because of that video of Lauren Southern where she's explaining why she's still single. A lot of her reasoning and arguments are basically some of the same arguments that, sort of feminists would use.
Yeah. That's why it was such a strange and trippy video to watch, this Lauren Southern Why I'm Not Married video. I'll link it in the show notes for anyone listening. But
right. And it's funny because I think we can all agree here, I'm an intersectional feminist, and I think everyone else here is as well. I mean, these are the same arguments that I would use to justify why women don't want to marry young. Of course, she has to use the word degenerate there and say,
yeah.
Generalities are still true, and that's why I still push generalities, even though they still throw me under the bus somehow. It was kind of a weird mess of cognitive dissonance.
Right, and even Tara McCarthy, she said,
oh my gosh.
She said, the problem I'm stating here is not that there are trolls on the internet, but that the people who proclaim to be on our side are trying to tear down women in our in-group. If you can't see why this is dysfunctional, I can't help you. And then goes on to say, guys, I'm not saying I can't take any trolling or harassment on the internet. Obviously, I can. I've probably had more of it than most of you will see in a lifetime, and I'm still here, not going anywhere. I'm not stating the above solely for my personal benefit. So it's like she's trying to appease the trolls at the same time. It's not like I can't take it, because obviously then you're going to call me a snowflake SJW. You
can't possibly be called that, of course.
Oh, sorry, in the marriage video, if I could, I was a bit struck on the fact that she's like, it's just that she wants to be able to get an education and then get a job and a career where she can get equal pay for equal work and make some money and establish herself financially independently without a man, and also have access to contraception so she can control the timing and number of children she has. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that, she's somehow not into women's being totally subservient to men and being baby machines. She's just not ready to be that yet. And it's just like, so basically what you want is white supremacist feminism for you.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly what you make fun of feminists advocating for the same stuff. And she's been so upset by people who are saying, don't have kids or whatever. But she doesn't have kids. So, she's contributing to the white genocide as far as I'm concerned.
Well, that's where this all sort of goes. So shortly after she made that video, people on the internet discovered that she had two ex-boyfriends who happened to be not white.
Yeah.
They weren't white, basically. And people, oh my goodness, how dare she? And it's so funny because, of course, then the harassment intensified to the point that, all of these Pepe avatars and these sort of far-right Twitter personalities did something that I'm very familiar with, which is called Thought Patrol. And it's when bigger sort of small-time far-right accounts sort of retweet you or post pictures of you, and a whole swarm of them come and call you, fat, ugly, retarded, bitch.
Oh, so bearing fans.
Yeah, it's quite analogous.
Yeah.
And of course she was experiencing that now too. And it's so funny because now after that happened, which it's terrible, and I don't want to give these people any energy, but this is why it's sort of relevant in this case. After that happened, she was then blaming it on leftists who were posing as right-wingers to discredit her. And it's so funny because even the sort of far-right Twitter accounts that were doing this and were sort of controlling this were all laughing at her because of it. because no, this is legitimately the way that they are.
I don't think she understands that she's not only part of a white supremacy movement, she's part of a male supremacy movement. And she hasn't really internalized her subservience yet. And I think that's what the objections that are being raised, and I'm not saying they're valid objections. I'm saying in the logic of messed upness.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you are a white supremacist and you also, many of them are a form of evangelical Christian in the United States and in other European countries, and that is also reinforced, the religious beliefs reinforce the notion of patriarchy and male rule and women being obedient and serving. And so, her very existence is an aberration to what the entire sort of goal of what a family and what people's roles in life should be. So it is weird that she sort of wants to, and you have this with anti-feminists, I think, throughout time, whether it's Phyllis Schlafly or some of the other more prominent women who rise to power, and they rise to power by attacking other women and trying to be sort of one of the boys. And that works for them for a little while till the boys turn around and go, okay, you need to go away now because you're not a boy.
Yeah, and I see that in the ex-Muslim movement too. It's weird because there's a lot of people that rise to power by justifying sort of far-right narratives about Muslims. There's criticizing Islam, and then there's justifying, anti-immigration and, Charles Murray racial IQ stuff.
Oh, God, of course.
But there comes a point where you don't toe the line even slightly, and you will criticize someone for something, say, promoting InfoWars, and then no longer are you their useful person, and then you get kicked to the curb.
Absolutely. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen those interactions, right, where they don't play the useful ex-Muslim role, and then all of a sudden they're in the out group.
There's a real issue that I know you wanted to talk about within this hang about tokenism and using people who are convenient, and the sort of the relationship that exists between the person who's been made the token and the people who need the token. And even that's very exploitative and not fair. But it does really, especially when it comes to the issue of Muslims and Islam, right? Because I'm fine going after Christianity, and I go after fundamentalist Christians who vote on their beliefs, but I don't destroy human beings because they're Christians, because they can change their minds. And I've now lived with plenty of people from Iraq and Iran and Turkey now, and people who are still practicing Muslims that are my colleagues and friends, and ones that came basically like as soon as they could leave Iran, they were like, I'm not really a Muslim, I'm an atheist. And this is what frustrates me about generalizations about Muslims in general. If you want to have a debate about Islam, that's fine, but there's no reason to object to people from the Middle East moving to Germany or moving to Europe if their values, aren't in massive conflict. So what they try to do is hide it as a debate of ideas. But what it really is a front for, obviously, is racial discrimination.
Right, exactly. That's the new racism, right? People talk about culture. They don't talk about openly KKK ideas anymore.
Of course not. And that's sort of, again, an intentional shifting of the Overton window to the right. So that when people really want to have a discussion about things like race or their idea of naturally or intrinsically justifiable hierarchies, such as what the alt-right believes, they now switch it to culture so that they can no longer have that as an out when people are criticizing them.
It really annoys me when people who are on the alt-right want to talk about the preservation of white culture. And my reaction is, oh, really? How many Beethoven symphonies have you listened to in the last year? How many art galleries have you gone to appreciate the works of Rubens or Michelangelo? Right. When was the last time you read some Shakespeare or some Wordsworth or Henry David Thoreau?
Exactly. Yeah.
What culture are you preserving?
Yeah, their sort of altered perception of what, quote, white culture is this very sort of grotesque pastiche of their conception of random things that they can put together in their mind. It's very gauche. It's almost like a Las Vegas of...
That's a great description.
It's almost like a Las Vegas of cheap and tacky neoclassical architecture, or with some Baroque elements and a woman wearing a powdered wig playing a harp or something like that. It's just they don't actually really enjoy all of these sort of multitudinous aspects of these individual cultures that sort of have used to make us sort of enrich our current lives. They just like to use it to justify our racial hierarchy, basically.
Right.
And that's sort of where a lot of the alt-right goes, is trying to justify these intrinsic or natural hierarchies that they think exist in nature. Hence, man over woman, white over basically everyone else. And that's why they're so interested now in a lot of pseudoscience, especially things that have been adapted from people like, going back as far as Antoine de Gobineau to sort of Nazi-era eugenics, and now sort of pseudoscience developed from people like J. Felipe Rushton, that they're now trying the best they can to make it seem modern and give it this sort of very gossamer thin veneer of scientific and intellectual rigor that it doesn't have.
People buy into it, like people in the atheist scene, people in the ex-Muslim scene, they buy into it. Like, it's so disturbing to see that when you're sort of accustomed to, you know, studying these movements or these types of extremists, and you pick up on the dog whistles, then you come across this whole like crowd of people that are saying, well, no, Milo isn't racist. And then you show them thing after thing after thing, and they're like, but he's Jewish, or he's married to a black guy, or he talks about how much he likes black dick. And you're like, how simple
Thomas
can
Jefferson wrote about liberty. He still owned slaves.
Yeah.
Right.
Doesn't matter. Like, how you treat one person doesn't tell you how you treat a group.
Right, exactly.
So, and that goes to even, I don't want people to scream Godwin's Law at me, but even Adolf Hitler had a Jewish doctor, and he called him the Honorable Jew. And even he himself said that it's not the Jewish individual to blame, it's the, quote, international Jewry, which is exactly the same sort of argument that people like the Golden One make.
Right. He seems like he is just not real.
No, really. I don't even know if he's a real human being, but...
Yeah, for people listening that aren't familiar with the Golden One, he's a Swedish bodybuilding YouTuber Nazi who is just... He's such a caricature. It's hard to believe he's real. It really is. I know.
He would be adorably ridiculous if he wasn't a fascist, basically.
I know.
And
I have to keep reminding myself that he's a Nazi, because I find myself like cracking up at his YouTube videos.
He's bizarrely charming, but it's very unfortunate. And this is sad too, because I consider myself somebody who is an enthusiast of all cultures, and I love learning about them, and I love educating myself about them. And I love learning about medieval Celtic culture, and I love learning about the Renaissance, and I really loved learning about the history of sort of the English monarchy during the Tudor periods. And it's really these people sort of, I can't believe I'm using this word, appropriate diverse historical moments and traditions and forms of artwork and architecture, again, to justify why they think they're better than other people. It's they don't understand it.
They taint a lot of things that way, like even just causes around ex-Muslims and Saudi women and, and the guardianship system in Saudi Arabia. All these hashtags are filled with far-right, alt-right, anti-Muslim people using Saudi women or ex-Muslims as sort of the reason to justify, I don't know, deporting all Muslims.
And you've heard of the term white Sharia, right?
Yeah.
So
no. What's white Sharia?
Okay. Let's start from the beginning. So a lot of these sort of far-right people use it ironically because, of course, they dislike Middle Eastern cultures from a racial standpoint. But, of course, they want to reinstate full patriarchy, of course. And basically, a lot of them want to reinstate sort of legal dominance of men over women. And they want to remove the right to vote and all of these things. And, of course, some of them will unironically say, oh, we need white Sharia to keep our women under control. And one of the people who first kind of justified this was actually that guy, Christopher Cantwell, aka the crying Nazi dude. Right. He talked about this. And I know a lot of these people do this as a sort of time.
So can you just explain who the crying Nazi is just for the audience?
Okay, so Christopher Cantwell was somebody who attended the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, and he was arrested and, excuse me, I'm not sure if the trial is still ongoing or if it's begun, but he was basically arrested for bringing or attempting to bring chemical weapons to the rally. And he has this video online where he's crying about it and how he didn't want it to go this far, and it's honestly pretty pathetic. So, yeah.
This was just a few days after he was talking big about how violent he was, and he would be more violent if he could. And then he was crying because he heard he was about to be arrested.
Yeah.
Right. His podcast is something else, but in one of his
He's the one that was taken off of OkCupid too, right?
Right, that was him as well.
Right, and there was a bunch of atheists upset and defending him from being removed from OkCupid. Like, he shouldn't have his dating life destroyed just because he has some bad views or whatever. It's like they want no consequences for speech of any kind. Yeah, I understand you support free speech, but speech also has, consequences. If you're going to talk about violence, then no company is going to want to have you and expose you to their other clients.
Oh. They consider you a danger to the other people, an imminent physical threat. So why would they want something like that on their platform? It's like finding out that somebody has a record of criminal behavior and people considering that to be a danger in some way. And in this case, that was actually true because now he's on trial. So yeah, Christopher Cantwell has one of his podcasts. He talks about instating white Sharia to preserve the white race. So it's, again, this sort of Manichaean idea of this clash of civilizations, preserve the white race, and not to make too many analogies to how the most extreme forms of Sharia law are implemented in these sort of fundamentalist societies, but it's a kind of similar sort of fire and brimstone rhetoric about civilization and the clashes of civilization. Of course, they always go on about that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as someone who's, grown up under Sharia in Saudi Arabia, even though I lived in a compound and had a brief relief from the morality police, which has gotten me so much hate from the people who want to discredit me and my lived experience as an ex-Muslim, because I'm not then truly oppressed under Sharia because we lived in a compound for foreigners where I didn't have to be exposed to morality police 24/7, but still I left the compound every day and did have to be exposed to the morality police and Sharia law. But anyways, as someone who's grown up in that kind of society, who's seen that, I can't tell you how alarming it is to see some similarities in some of these figures, like Jordan Peterson sounding like a Salafist mullah. Some of the things he says are straight. They would fit right in Saudi Arabia. He once had a tweet about how casual sex could necessitate state tyranny or something like that.
That was wild.
And how he doesn't, he confuses the concept of consent constantly. He has some video with Molyneux where he's talking about how the leftists, they wanted this, crazy lifestyle where everyone does whatever they want sexually, but then they, get upset about, inappropriate sexual behavior, like non-consensual touching. Like, how can you not understand that, yes, people should be free to express their sexuality, and also people should consent to that?
Again, it's this very reductive thinking, these generalities that a lot of people in the far right use, with Lauren Southern and generalities about women in society or generalities about sexual behavior and consent that they seem to not be able to make exceptions for in their mind and realize that they're very different things.
Right, but when it comes to them, then they want nuance, endless nuance.
Right.
As you guys have been talking, I've been reflecting on what the mindset must be like to just wake up in the morning and think, hey, I'm a man, so I can tell women what to do. And I'm white, so I can tell everybody else what to do. And they all have to listen to me because I'm a man and I'm white. And that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I was also reflecting on the fact that in Iron Man 2, which is a movie that came out in the 21st century, I think it's Iron Man 2, where they're at Tony's house and there's an attack coming. And Pepper wants to leave. This is before they know the attack is coming. And Tony's saying, no, we're going to stay. And she's like, no, we're leaving. He's like, no, the man says no. As if that was supposed to end the argument, as if the man is a justification for the conclusion, says, no, and therefore no being the decision. That mentality is actually quite pervasive, and I think more subconscious and cultural, less so now, but it is definitely out there, this notion that, because you're a man, especially if you've been raised in a very religious situation, you're told it's the divine order. Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And to control your women and your children is a reflection on your masculinity. So if they're rebelling against you, that means you're weak. So you have to oppress them in order to maintain your power. Mm-hmm. And that being the sense of entitlement in terms of how the world should work. And then how frustrated these guys must be to just not have people paying attention to them. And dismissing them and not giving them the validation that their masculinity and the notions of masculinity require. So the problem is fundamentally this really pathological notion of power distribution based on things like biology, which are random, and not on morality, which is something that as conscious beings we're quite capable of doing.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's funny that you mentioned sort of this natural or biological order, because another one of these people who was going quite hard against women in the alt-right was this young man who was expelled from Boston University for also attending Unite the Right rally, and his name is Nick Fuentes.
Oh, yeah, I know that guy.
Oh, dear, do I know him? He runs the America First, I think, podcast, and he went on a large group podcast with Lauren Southern and Roaming Millennial and that no bullshit guy. And I think Theron Meyer was there, and ContraPoints was also there briefly, and also Destiny. And he kept talking about the natural order. It doesn't satisfy the natural order. And he kept bringing about this concept, this sort of vaguely defined nebulous concept of natural order to justify how he feels about the world, why it's correct. And it was so ridiculous and facile, but of course a lot of these people will buy into it because it's easy to think about, and it's an easy answer to complicated, difficult problems that they feel like they need to deal with in their life.
Right, and I think I saw Theron Meyer call him out on some transphobic bullshit, even though she's a right-wing personality, I believe. I don't know her that well, but she did call him out on thinking that trans people in the kind of world that he wants would need to go visit a doctor and try to cure themselves. But
it is strange, isn't it, that there's sort of like intersectional fascism now?
Yeah.
Where you have women saying, no, we have a right to speak up in favor of fascism too, and trans people are like, no, we have a right to be trans in this alt-right sort of space and to be respected for, not being cis. And it is just kind of like, do you realize how much you're actually absorbing of the norms that you're fighting against? You're arguing for your own dignity in movements that inherently reject your dignity.
Yes. And actually, in the intersectional fascism thing, I'd like to include, Muslim MRAs as well. They will tweet out things from people like Vox Day, who's a white supremacist.
Oh, dear, Vox Day.
Anders Breivik supporter. And they'll just totally ignore the white supremacist side, but the woman hating, they love to, share those views. If Vox Day writes a piece on how, there's no such thing as marital rape, and once you get married, that's consent forever. An Islamist, far-right Islamist, who's calling himself an MRA and using terms like red-pilled now, is also going to love to pick up on that. And I spoke to 2 Saudi women recently on my show, and they were complaining about how many people, or one of them was talking to me about how many people she sees sharing Steven Crowder and Gavin McInnes videos in the Saudi circles, you know, because there are some overlapping talking points.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think Chapo Trap House was talking about Steven Crowder and a lot of his very sort of extreme traditionalist views and how he hates alcohol and he disdains sex before marriage and how morally rigid it is. And he is. And one of them was like, he should just convert to Wahhabism and he'd fit right in.
Yeah. That's what I see all the time. And I see the overlap, and, you know, it frustrates me that people who I considered, you know, atheist allies in the past years are not seeing this and championing one kind of conservatism while bashing another. But it all amounts to the same sort of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It would be the case that if you had a fundamentalist Christian, a fundamentalist Muslim, a fundamentalist Jew, all men, and a white supremacist who are all going to be on a panel show together, in the green room beforehand, they could all agree on how women are out of hand these days.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. How feminism is cancer.
Yeah, they could all bond over that, you know, and really get chummy about that topic. And it's kind of scary when you think, you know, if they actually set aside their differences and just focused on attacking the rights of women, we'd be in real trouble.
Yeah, and that's what's scary, this cross-radicalization, because now the Saudi Islamist types who are calling themselves MRAs and red-pilled, they are finding, like, I guess, more updated and more effective ways to radicalize younger people, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're borrowing from the Western alt-right.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure in a lot of ways they love the alt-right, or at the very least they admire their strategies, admire how they want to bring back the glorious days of their civilization. Yeah. It's a little ISIS-esque.
And also their use of, you know,
ideology.
Degenerate. They love that. Like, homosexuality is degenerate. Women having sex before marriage is degenerate. And even in Lauren's, you know, Why I'm Not Married video,
this is the word degenerate.
Yeah, let me quote her. I am not trying to sell an idea that me as a 22-year-old needs to be married right now for the sake of traditionalism and not being a degenerate. In fact, I think it would be degenerate for me to get married right now without someone that I'm truly in love with and think could be a good father to my children. In fact, that would be significantly worse for the Western world. Talk about delusions of grandeur.
Oh, God.
Significantly worse for my children to raise them as a single mother, you know, shitting on single mothers for no reason. Mm-hmm. As you know, they are more likely to commit suicide, more likely to be alcoholics, more likely to drop out of school, and it's just devastating growing up with a broken family. So I'm not going to get married at 22 years old, just so that I won't be called a degenerate on the internet. What is completely shocking to me is the complete and utter lack of understanding and nuance. Yes, Lauren, people can say the same about you.
It's almost sad. Like, I want to feel sad for her, but then I realize she enables and actively promotes some really disgusting behavior, like how she was on that little boat before the whole, what was it, the Generation Identity? Was it Generation Identity that did Defend Europe? It was right before they made
it was like Identity Europa or something. I'm not sure.
Oh, no, that's another far-right group.
But, that's another one? Oh, sorry, I get my Nazis mixed up all the time.
It's the People's Front for Judea, not the Judean People's Front. Come on.
Yeah, so it was before Defend Europe had their main boat, but she was on this little sort of tugboat out in the Mediterranean and directing the tugboat towards the boat that apparently had migrants in it, or
she was shooting
from migrant boats.
She was shooting flares at a rescue boat for migrants.
Right. So it's like,
where's the nuance? Where's the nuance for the migrants?
Right. So it's hard to feel that much sympathy when you enable and actively do a lot of this really terrible behavior. So it's a weird place for me.
Like, terrible behavior is even an understatement. It's like behavior that can cause, death.
Right. It's disgusting.
Get you kicked off Patreon.
Yeah. Something she
It takes a lot.
Yeah, it does take a lot.
For these people, unless they decide to actively condemn white supremacy. So
now,
until that day ever happens, which it might not ever, of course, it's hard to feel that bad for her.
Well, Lauren seems to be shifting more and more and more towards it, right? Like more openly. Like she was wearing a T-shirt that had some sort of something about Europe written on it, which was like,
Europe belongs to us.
Yeah, Europe belongs. There were lightning bolts. Exactly. Europe belongs to us, and she's Canadian. So what the hell?
I know.
What the hell is she saying?
Not to say in her defense, but this does perhaps illustrate one of our psychological biases, that when we become aware of it, or at least when I became aware of it, I could check myself if I was about to do this. Mm-hmm. So what she's saying in this case is that when other people, what Lauren is saying is when other people behave degenerately, it's bad for the white race and the white culture, and these things should be condemned. But when it comes to her in her particular case, well, then there are situational factors that need to be taken into account. In psychology, this is actually a very well-known phenomenon, which is the tendency to blame others for their failures and to blame situations for our own failures. So when other white women choose not to have kids, like I'm 45 now, I'm not going to have kids, I'm bad, right? She can judge me because I've failed in my sort of evolutionary duties and in my obligations to the preservation of artwork and culture that they don't appreciate. But when it's her, because I'm a bad person, I'm an evil liberal feminist, and an S-Jude and all this kind of stuff. But when it comes to her, then it's all about her situation and her factors and her plans and what she wants, and it's excusing the same things that she's going to.
Right. She's all. I mean, I'm still trying to figure this out myself. I'm only 22 years old. I mean, that may seem old to some hardcore traditionalists that I should have 7 kids by now. But the reality is we're living in a very different age right now, and a lot of us who are on the more conservative end of things are longing for an age we've never lived in. We're trying to recreate something that we never grew up being taught or understood. We've been inundated with so much Marxist propaganda, anti-relationship, anti-man, anti-marriage propaganda.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
That it's hard for us to recreate this thing. It's hard for us to do relationships properly. Okay, so she's totally, excusing herself. She ends with, the reality is people are going to fail. I'm going to mess up maybe. I will end up a crazy cat lady when I'm 30, but I'm going to fight for that not to happen. Mm-hmm. And she even mentions some women, yes, they're going to be happier not having any kids. They're going to be happier not being married, and that's okay. That doesn't make them a horrible human being. That doesn't mean they have to be shamed for the rest of their life, except Lauren, you've got a ton of videos shaming people for that.
Exactly. The video...
Fascist feminism.
The video literally right before the video where she says, "Why I'm not married," is her basically shaming women for being single or for having sort of autonomy. And it's her just making this sort of grotesque parody of a single woman in her 20s talking about how she's not ready to get married. It's just stunning. Like, it's a better self-own than anybody else could have done for her. It's the one that she did to herself.
Yeah, I just browsed through her videos, just looking at the titles. They're like, millennials are being set up for loneliness, return of the traditional women, or according to science, don't have kids, city women versus marriage and kids. Like, oh my gosh, this has been her agenda. And now when it's been turned around on her, all of a sudden, it's all about, yeah, but I'm only 22. Yeah, of course some women are happier not being married. Like, okay. Wow.
Who apparently love Western European civilization so much. It's funny because their idea of this conditional role of women in society, that any sort of autonomy that they have is conditional, really never even existed to begin with. Obviously, we had in generality, there was patriarchy, but look at Queen Elizabeth or Mary Queen of Scots or even Bloody Mary, these women who assumed power just, in spite of all odds. In the case of Elizabeth, she was at the time one of the most competent rulers of Western Europe, and they seem to completely ignore that. Obviously, when we perceive this, from a modern sensibility, obviously monarchy is a bad thing, and this is not something that we're praising, although, to be fair, the alt-right does, in many cases, praise monarchy. And
they've been so upset about Prince Harry's engagement. It's been great.
Yeah. Right. But this idea that they have of Western civilization is this fever dream that never existed in the real world. It's their idealization and aestheticization of civilization and politics that they want for themselves that never existed and never will.
One thing I was also thinking about as you guys were talking was the fact that, we have in common with the women on the alt-right the fact that we experience that sort of sexist harassment and sexism in not necessarily in the same ways, but we both experience it. I think a big difference, and in some ways I have sympathy for this position that they're in, on the left and leftist men, not the kind of skeezy guys who claim to be male feminists, but like guys who are genuinely committed to human rights and include women in that circle. Those guys are on our side, and they support us, and they try to understand, and when we're not there, they try to be allies on our behalf, But the men in the alt-right, even the way they have those discussions, like, for instance, the Golden One doing a video saying, yes, I think we should have women doing it. That's not him giving an opinion as an equal member of a community. That's him speaking from a position of power as a man.
Right.
Granting, in his permission for women to do this. That's not equality. And then on the other side, guys who might not dislike you, the way that they treat women. I was listening to way too many streams lately because of some YouTube drama. There was a woman whose name I can't remember now. I think it's 2 words, but she was on a stream talking about something similar, about this issue about her not being married yet. And in the stream, she said, I'm ready to go. I just haven't found the right guy, but I'm ready now. I'm ready to go. And they were joking about her being ready to go right now in the stream at the time. Now, this was a couple weeks ago. People were talking about a convention that's happening. Well, it's scheduled to happen in Arizona, a free speech event.
Oh, sounds lovely already.
Oh, yeah.
There's already divisions because a lot of people think that the alt-right aren't being allowed to speak at that conference, and they should be allowed to speak if it's a free speech conference. I don't want to get distracted. However, they were talking about this conference. This woman is attending that conference, and one of the guys who likes this woman, they have like names like Braving Ruin and Millennial Woes, and I just can't kind of keep track of all these abstract concepts.
It's very confusing.
But this particular woman, he was joking that he was going to follow her around with a marriage sack, like in Borat. And he was just going to kidnap her and take her off. Because you know what? She's ready to go. And like with friends like that, and then your other option is the Golden One speaking from on high from his male privilege to grant you permission to speak.
You got to give Golden One some credit, though. He was all like, look, alt-right women, they break up the leftist narrative. The more alt-right women, the better, The leftist narrative apparently is that the alt-right are just neck-bearded dudes living in their mom's basement, so it's good to have some women break that up, and, people like looking at women, and he's a feminist ally there. No, I'm joking. He's a Nazi, and he hates women, but it's funny. It's funny that he's speaking up for her.
So I just want to plug a video by somebody known as Sonia, or An Actual Joke. She made a video about women in the alt-right called Wives with a Purpose, and she talks about exactly this, and she plays a clip by Lana Lochtef of Red Ice Radio talking about exactly the same thing, that having women in the alt-right and women in fascist movements raising their voices to them is a good thing because it undermines the sort of leftist narrative about the alt-right, or as they perceive it, except the narrative in this case is predominantly true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll link to that video if you can send me a link to it. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's good.
Time and time again, we've seen the alt-right be happy to use people to further their, to further their talking points, no matter how against those people they are, right? So they've had, what's her name? They've welcomed Tila Tequila, who's a person of color.
Oh, yeah.
Happily on.
That.
So they say that she brings diversity into the movement. She brings diversity into their anti-diversity movement, and they like that because she helps sell their ideas. Like, oh, look, we're not that bad. We've even got people of color in our Nazi anti-people of color movement. So it's kind of like when ISIS was recruiting jihadi fighters, and it was like, oh, they're being so inclusive. They had like a sign language translator in one of their Islamist propaganda videos, and it was, yeah. Sometimes...
Did somebody actually try to call that it being inclusive? Because that's just absolutely ridiculous.
No, I think people are only being sarcastic, but...
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Because believe me, I just, doesn't... after this much time on the internet, I just don't have natural incredulity. I'm more like, no, actually someone could probably be dumb enough to say...
Oh, yeah, they totally could.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have intersectional fascism, as you said so beautifully. Yeah. So,
right.
And fascist feminism. That was a good term. I think that would make a perfect title for this episode. So thanks for that, Kristi.
Intersectional fascism. They're literal feminazis now.
Oh, yeah. That's amazing. I love it. Because for how long, have they talked about, calling people Nazis turns them into Nazis. And then they've called, feminist Nazis for ages. Didn't turn any feminists Nazis, but maybe turned some Nazis feminist.
I love it.
It's great. We are living in a bizarre year where we have even an anti-Muslim imam, for fuck's sake.
Oh, yeah.
I often feel like we went off into a parallel universe, and somewhere there's a Clinton administration where we're having predictable fights about emails, but at least the government is stable, and the world situation is way cooler.
It is.
Yeah, just normal, right? This is pure insanity what's happening. And going back to the white Sharia thing, I remember seeing a screenshot of Peter Sweden tweeting something about, concerned about how this woman was thrown out of a nightclub because she was wearing too little clothing, and that was triggering for men. And I think his point was that, the migrants might get too, excited by that, so Sweden is destroyed. Yeah, so Sweden has been destroyed by the Muslims, part 3,069,000 or whatever. Right. But then Tara McCarthy jumped in. She said, "It seems reasonable to me. Her top is virtually see-through." And then he had to go back on his thing and say, "Yeah, I would agree, but the question is the motives from the owners here." So they're kind of okay as long as the reason isn't Muslims. They're kind of okay with the same shit, like policing women's clothing, kicking them out of bars for not wearing it, something modest. This is some really dangerous stuff. And believe me, I lived in Saudi. I know following that through, it ends up in a really bad society. It's not a good way to live.
It's funny when they feel like their different forms of bigotry are in conflict with one another, which bigotry do they eventually side with?
Yeah.
That meme of choosing between two things and brushing the sweat from your brow.
Oh yeah, the two buttons. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, but I have to say, there is a plus to the existence of Peter Sweden, and that is Peter Norway on Twitter.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
he's great. He's great.
My good friend.
Shout out to Peter Norway.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's so classic liberal. In the E in liberal is a 3, and he's awesome, and he always makes me laugh.
Yeah, he's great. I think it was him tweeting about the Peter Sweden screenshots where Tara McCarthy eventually agreed with.
Oh yeah, probably was him.
Yeah. And did you guys see these clips by Libtard America? This other fashy woman. Oh my gosh, this woman is literally advocating for beating and public humiliations for women, for European women who are welcoming their rapists in and defending them. Basically, European women who are not anti-immigrant.
Right.
So they should be beaten in the streets. It's
women like me in Germany.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, quite supportive of the of Merkel's decisions on humanitarian grounds, and can say no, it's not a hellhole, and no, there weren't mass rapes in Cologne. I live in Cologne. Last time I looked at it, there were 3 reported rapes and mass sexual assaults and grabbing buttocks or grabbing breasts. But when people talk about mass rapes, they're lying. Multiple rapes, yes. Mass rapes. No.
Yeah, from what I heard, it seemed like it was a free-for-all and everyone was just being raped in the streets constantly.
And that's, not what happened. And there were issues we can talk about how it was dealt with the police and the media and when people were alerted. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of questions that we can ask and learn from, but we can't ask any of those questions if all you're doing is saying Muslim men rape white women. That's the same thing that they use the KKK uses.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very old...
in the United States.
It is a very old trope.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny how this libtard woman, I hate to say her name because it makes me sound like I'm using the term.
I think now she goes as blonde in the belly of the beast.
Okay, that's better. Blonde in the belly of the beast.
I know, still rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah. So she's
had... shortened to blonde.
Pardon? Yeah, blonde. You could shorten a lot of them to just blonde or wanting to be blonde. Didn't Lauren Southern tweet a picture of her childhood out to prove that she had once naturally blonde hair because some people were teasing her that her hair was dark now and she dyed it blonde? It's so pathetic, the purity testing that they have to go through. Mm-hmm. But this blonde lady, she compares the situation of women that aren't anti-immigrant to women in France that banged Nazis. So she says, and it's like she's saying that they deserve much worse. They were beaten, their heads were shaved, and they were paraded through the streets. Sometimes they were tarred, stripped half naked, and had swastikas drawn on them, and rightfully so because they deserved worse. So it seems that only public humiliation because of sensitivity to social alienation can get women in line. A public beating is in order for all these treasonous European women sanctioning the migrant influx. Perhaps that would curtail their disgusting behavior and stop them from welcoming their own destruction.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's word for word from that video clip of her.
Yeah, I just read the quote. So, I mean, it amuses me that she's comparing the women who are pro-migrant to the women that were sleeping with the Nazis. And it's funny that she isn't seeing how people can sort of view her as the woman that's getting too close with Nazis. It's absurd.
I'm physically ill right now. I'm not being physically ill, but I'm I have a physical revulsion to what I've just listened to.
It's disgusting.
And the violence of it. If you replaced women in those comments, and you made it about blacks or Jews, that would rightfully be called hate speech. Yeah. And we're calling for the violence against people, and not just sort of generalized, but very specific types of violence. It astounds me. It absolutely astounds me on a moral level. I don't even know that Hitler was that obvious about how he wanted to run a society. Yeah. I don't remember him saying anything about dragging women through the streets or anything.
Not in the beginning, yeah.
I mean, that is it's so misogynistic and hateful.
Unbelievable. And then this is the movement where people are shocked that people hate women. What? It doesn't make sense to me. How do you sign up for this? Be like this, and then, act all upset that people aren't treating you, women, with respect. Even in Andrew Anglin's, style guide, he outlines the names that you can call women. He's like, women can be called slut, whore, bitch, harlot, trollop, slag, skag. Whenever writing about women, make sure to follow the prime directive and blame Jew feminism for their behavior. But it's like, I mean, he's put out a guide for what sort of slurs you should hurl at women. This is the movement.
And can I also point out, that's what she says should happen to white women.
Yeah. The treasonous women.
Yeah, what was she willing to tolerate to women who aren't white? Rape?
Yeah, it's scary to
Forced
think.
sterilization?
Probably.
You're already crossed the line into violence, mass violence, mob violence.
This woman, people argue, is not racist.
Oh my God.
It's hard. Like, how far has the Overton window shifted? It's unbelievable.
How absurdly craven are people when it comes to these just disgusting characters? Are you that afraid to call somebody misogynistic or bigoted? Is that really the worst thing in the world? I don't understand it. I think especially in the past 2 weeks, I'm just sort of blown away by how craven people are on the internet for rightfully calling this stuff out for what it is.
It's political correctness. It's political correctness gone mad. They want people to be political. Right. Yeah, exactly. They want like a sort of white supremacist political correctness. You can't call them racist because it'll hurt their feelings, and you have to be really careful talking about them so as to not hurt their feelings. And the worst thing in the world is to be called a racist, and definitely not comparable to deal with racism. But being called a racist, that's just the worst.
And I'm going to go back to the quote because I'm sorry, I'm still emotionally processing it. Where she's coming from in terms of her base regard, even for white women that she should have the most respect for, is one of still contempt and no sense of those women's human dignity. In fact, that's exactly what she wants to deny them in public. And you can only really get to that point if you don't have a regard for their human dignity before that, right? The reason why I oppose the death penalty is one, because we should be better. We're human beings. It's not about getting justice. It's about us and what it says about us, those punishments. And here, there is just no sort of base common, and I know it's just, this is obvious when you say it out loud, but there's just no common ground for connection with other human beings on the basis of being members of the same species. Mm-hmm. And that kind of just blows my mind, that it's not just about we respect white people and we don't respect others. Even with women, there isn't a base level of dignity that you're saying, look, people, we need to be protected. And if you don't have that point of empathy, I can see, because, the thing about empathy is that you start with people you care about, and then as you grow up as an adult, you're meant to extend that out and be able to have empathy with people who aren't like you and in different circumstances, and that's how you grow emotionally in terms of my perspective as a human being. Right. But they're not to that. They don't even have that kind of fundamental extension of your universal human rights, and the absence of that is terrifying to me.
Yeah, terrifying. Exactly. I mean, that's kind of what so many people talked about that was terrifying about groups like ISIS, right? But the same people fall silent when it comes to talking about the alt-right, or will just characterize people like Lauren Southern as a conservative journalist or things like that. You can't downplay this stuff because it is so harmful, and this time it's coming from inside the West. It's rotting the inside. Mm-hmm. And this blonde in the belly of the beast woman, this isn't the only clip from her. Constantly, she's always
all the time.
Yeah, she's always like, the only way we can turn this around is getting women out of positions of political power. We need to establish a fierce and strong patriarchy that is governed by men that love this country. Women's suffrage is to blame for politicians who value diversity over tribalism. And she thinks Barack Obama is a pussy, and the West has been feminized and shit like that. So it's like, what kind of a woman are you? I don't understand how you can have so much self-hate.
Yeah. It's either collaborating in order to get privilege.
Yeah.
Or, self-hate. Self-interest or self-hate.
I think it's a combination, because in the fascist worldview, women's dignity and their autonomy, or whatever semblance of autonomy they have, is always conditional to their subservience to men and also their fulfillment of their role in the ethno-state or dictatorship or whatever they would like to consider it. And I think she has fully internalized that perspective into herself. So yeah, it's both self-hatred and wanting to feel like she has her dignity in her own personal, that's consistent with her personal worldview.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's definitely a combination. One strategy is to try and secure a position of power for yourself in the ethno-state or whatever, in whichever movement you're a token of. And the other, the only reason that you're open to this is that there's got to be some level of self-hate, right? Even with Gad Saad, it's not only this movement, right? So even with like atheist figures like Gad Saad, he has had Holocaust deniers and anti-Semites and white genociders on his show so many times. He's promoted those people. This is the crowd he runs with. This is the audience he's cultivated. And then they did a free speech event, Gad Saad and Jordan Peterson, which I wrote a piece about. They had to deplatform the now open ethno-nationalist Faith Goldie because she appeared on a Daily Stormer podcast during the Charlottesville rally, and she was mocking Jews and things like that. So they watched her video, or Peterson talked about how he watched her video on this podcast and, didn't find her to be doing a good job asking them questions, but also could not, properly denounce her. He said, I think she's not a reprehensible person. She's a good person, blah, blah, blah. Like you just talked about how you watched her on a Nazi podcast and didn't find her appropriate enough so that you have to cancel her appearance at your event and now explain to a full room of these, hardcore free speech warriors why you are deplatforming someone. And then, people like Gad Saad who are part of that event got hit with such nasty anti-Semitism from Faith Goldie's fans, from his, former fans, I guess. Just really disgusting stuff that I wouldn't want to repeat. And it made me feel sad for him. But this is what he signed up for. This is what he cultivated. This is the kind of rhetoric that he doesn't mind when it's against other groups.
Exactly.
So, you see this time and time again where the token gets turned on for slightly questioning something. So it never really pays off to be a token for such hateful movements.
Oh yeah, they'll throw you over the bus to prove how righteous they are, and then they'll cover up for the white men who are sexually harassing or doing other things that they know about, because they're part of the old boys network. That's how they work.
Yeah. So any closing thoughts?
My closing thought is this feels like a conversation with people I've known for a long time and really enjoy talking to, not the first conversation we've had.
Awesome.
Yeah, very much the same. I really greatly enjoyed speaking to you both. And I mean, obviously, I think it's kind of like we're all preaching to the choir in this respect because it's so obvious to us as women who have encountered harassment on the internet for speaking our minds, even though it's not in support of fascism, obviously. But, I mean, it's sort of, the bottom line is just how absurd this is. And as much as I want to feel empathy for these women, it's hard to when they say such disgusting, incomprehensible things towards other people, and when they finally experience some of that bigotry towards themselves, they don't know how to comprehend it or process it or sort of synthesize how it's very much what they're doing against other people in their out groups.
Yeah, I guess the hope would be that something will click someday and they'll realize that the way that they've been treated is kind of like how they've been treating other people, and it doesn't feel good when you're on the receiving end, and maybe generalizations should stop about, all groups instead of just your group or just you. So, yeah, that's the hope, that people come around, or even just, some people listening can maybe start to pick up on the signals and the dog whistles better.
Right.
And I also really enjoyed talking to both of you. Hopefully we can chat again because, really did feel like...
This is great.
Yeah, fascist feminism. I already have an episode or two on fascist fashion with controversy.
Oh, I love that one.
So, yeah, fascist feminism was the next step, right?
Oh, man.
We're there.
Nazis. Feminist Nazis.
Literal feminazis. Woohoo! All right. All right. Well, lovely chatting with you. Thank you both for joining me on the show today.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/nice mangoes. No Ian Mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @nicemangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal, nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no Ian Mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too. A special thanks to Dylan Beck for theme music, sound, and production help.